moderator will be Miss Koundouri. She's a professor at Athens University of Economics and Business, and she is working with Dr. Jeffrey Sachs on sustainable development networks, and they are doing amazing job in Greece, and she's also director of the Climate Kick Greece. And then we will go by alphabetical order, and we have Laszlo Borbli, State Councillor for the Department of Sustainable Development for Romania, and who was also president of the 19th session of the UN Commission for Sustainable Development. President Constantinescu, President of Romania, 96-2000. Madam President Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, President of Mauritius, 2015-2018. Garry Jacobs, President and CEO of World Academy of Arts and Sciences. Winston Nagan, who is a chairman of the Board of Trustees. President Nishani, the former president of Albania, and Madam President Rosalia Artega, the former president of Ecuador and former Minister of Education of Ecuador. And Nikolaos Theodossiou, chair of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network of Black Sea, and we are really happy that we could be able to combine World Academy of Arts and Sciences and also Sustainable Development Solutions Network together, and to bring up this kind of discussions, because I think that everything is, we need raise up our voices. As I'm sure that President Rosalia, President Constantinescu, and President Artega will agree. We had yesterday there was announcement of the second letter with the Gordon Brown, and it was really very nice. And it was in Washington Post. It was in all the international newspapers. Then I wish moderator can lead now.
Thank you very much.
If I may also ask during the discussion, if everyone can mute themselves, because during the discussion, whenever you are just making a noise, it's immediately just creating difficulties on the media.
Thank you very much, Muradov. We have 1 hour and 15 minutes, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to sincerely thank the Nijami International Center for gathering such a truly distinguished panel of heads of states with such a strong academic contribution, as well as academics with a strong focus on UN Agenda 2030 and the implementation of the 17 SDGs. In the next 1 hour and 15 minutes, we want to focus on the role of academia in the implementation of the SDGs and how that defines the way we want to recover from COVID-19 crisis. I'm gonna briefly refer to our recent history so that we put our discussion into context. And when I'm referring to history, I refer to the Agenda to 2030. So it's September 2015, New York, 193 heads of states adopt the UN Agenda 2030, a commitment to achieve the 17 SDGs by 2030. And we all know by now that these 17 SDGs focus on prosperity, people, and the planet. Focus on prosperity with regards to ending extreme poverty, focus on people in terms of being inclusive and leaving no one behind, and focus on the planet in terms of mitigating climate change and biodiversity loss. These SDGs are supposed to indicate our pathway to prosperity and peace. And of course, after the signature of the SDGs, we all know that we moved to the Paris Agreement, where we committed to keeping the global temperature below 2 degrees Celsius. We also know that in 2018, this commitment was limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is what we can afford to have as an increase in climate change in order to survive. And in 2019, New York Climate Week, September, UN SDSN showed a way to operationalize the SDGs in 6 transformation pathways: education, health, energy decarbonization, sustainable food, land, water, oceans, sustainable cities, communities, and digital revolution for sustainable development. And to enforce all this, Europe, just before the end of 2019, announced the European Green Deal, showing leadership in decoupling growth and environmental protection, and having climate neutral Europe by 2050 as its central goal. And also making sure that in the process of becoming climate neutral, we become leaders in clean products and technology, and ensure and just an inclusive transition to sustainable development. And then COVID-19 happened. And the effort of all states in the world was focused on flattening the infection curve, that is taking strict isolation measures to reduce the spread of the pandemic. Of course, flattening the infection curve steepens the macroeconomic recession curve. And we are now struggling to identify the way forward, the way to recover from this pandemic, and the way to finance and leverage finance for the recovery of this pandemic. IMF has received requests for help from over 100 states, whereas the European Union has introduced a new recovery instrument, the so-called Next Generation EU. I would like first to turn to President Emil Constantinescu and pose the crucial question: how can we avoid the pandemic turning into a major economic and financial crisis that will long outlast the health crisis? And what kind of recovery do we need? I know that you've been a major reformation and power in your country. I know that you have been instrumental in changing the economy of your country, and I think we have lots to learn from you.
Okay, I think that the President Constantinescu is online, but he's unmuted himself. But, wait. Okay. I think that you can move on for the second speaker.
Okay, okay, of course. I would like then, if I may address President Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, President of Mauritius, and also a biodiversity scientist, and ask how she sees the recovery from this pandemic. How can she envisage facing this socioeconomic crisis, but also restarting the economy in a way that is more sustainable in the future in terms of avoiding reoccurrence of similar or other crises?
Thank you again. I'd like to thank the Nizami Ganjavi for putting together this very important panel. And I would like to thank Rovshan for having put this together, invited me to participate. I saw that one of the focus of the discussion today would be the role of academia, I think, in the implementation of the SDGs. And I think we're going to see it through the lens of the COVID-19 crisis. So I think up front, I would like to just try to decouple the two issues. Because in today's discussion, we are talking about the role of academia in the implementation of the SDGs. And I think we'll also look at the COVID crisis, which came, as you have rightly mentioned, while we were discussing the implementation and how to get the best result with the SDGs, with the promise, as UN has said, of leaving no one behind. The world of academia, as we know it, has always had a very key role to play, not just in the world of tertiary education, but also in terms of research and policy dialogue. And since 2015, I think we have had the additional challenge in helping the country and the region deliver on the SDGs by 2030. And the 17 SDGs, as we're all aware, they're all systems in themselves, and they provide for a plethora of themes that speak to the academic world in terms of research challenges and work should already be going up, and until, of course, the COVID struck, when everybody started looking at the SDGs through the COVID lens. But these policy dialogue that the academia and academics are encouraged to participate in, I think they must be based on research having carried out on themes which are important for the country, the region, because it's based on these data that important policies can be crafted for the country and for the region. Now, COVID may be resonating with all the SDGs, but I thought in particular, I would focus on just a few of them so as to bring to light the issue that we're trying to address, because we're talking short term in terms of delivering, at least in keeping lives whole and together, and also, addressing and of course winning over this pandemic. So let us look at a few of the SDGs, in particular SDG 2, the hunger. We're looking, of course, at the health. We're also looking at the gender equality. And as I said, SDG 3, because it's concerned health and well-being. Water. We are also something which has been revealed immensely is reduced inequality, SDG 10. And I think immediately post-COVID, I think hopefully we are in there before the second wave comes in, is we are looking at goal 8, which is decent work and economic growth. And then the last one, which people don't look at very carefully, but I think to me it is very important, is SDG 17, which is partnership to achieve the goals. So if we focus a little bit on this, then we can see through the academic lens how this can be addressed. So let us look at the short brief I've just mentioned of the SDGs, and let us look at hunger, because many countries we have seen how hunger became an issue. And we've seen in some countries, people were saying that, we'll die of hunger before COVID strikes us. So the data and the strategies which would have been developed by institution would be to reduce hunger in the widest sense of the word, not just to address the quality of the food, the quantity of the food, but also the quality to address hidden hunger. And this is, of course, made available through locally resourced resources, and also, of course, quick access to food. So one thing that I think policymakers, institutions have to look at is how we can deliver at the level of the community and how we can deliver locally so that these issues are addressed there. So, people do not have to walk around too much to access food, it's there. So we're talking about food security. And we also look at the distribution of food supplies, because whenever there's a famine, we know that it's not lack of food, it's the breakdown in the distribution of the food as it is. And also one thing that we are in the fourth industrial revolution, at least we are positioning Africa, for example, in the 4IR, is how to use modern technology, for example, like blockchain, that where people will be able to know where the food is available, how it can be, how it can be distributed. So these are again data and what technology can be leveraged in these communities, in these countries, in this region, so that at least food security is ensured. Then, of course, the one which is, of course, very, very big, which we have been discussing, and of course, it strikes right through the COVID issue, is good health and well-being, SDG 3. And the issue of new emerging diseases. And I think here, the COVID has also revealed the state of preparedness of our institution, especially of our basic healthcare system. And we know that tropical countries, for example, they are more vulnerable to this disease, to these pandemics. And so they not only have to tackle upfront the diseases that in the pandemic, but they also have to tackle other underlying issues like neglected diseases, which do not get the attention of many donors, of many other institutions. And these again have to be tackled locally with locally available data. And this is where, again, institutions should be researching more into these, so that these do not become the underlying feature that will actually accentuate the effect of the pandemic, like the COVID, for example. So there again, critical data is needed to be able to shape policy and to be able to combat these issues. The other issue we have seen with the frontliners, we have seen the gender inequality. And this issue of quality, as I said, on the field has been very, very, very glaring. And again, where we need data is how to be able to assess the ratio of doctors, the ratio of healthcare workers to the population. And again, we're also looking at the drive to have these people trained properly and manipulate the right technology, be aware of all the issues and be prepared for any pandemic. So this issue of resilience of our institution is very important. The SDG 6, we look at water, access, quality, distribution. Again, the policy of water is so critical because we know in so many countries, the issue of water is very much an issue of the have and the have-nots, where water is very often in private lands. And what happens in the light of the climate, of a changing climate, where you find that access to water isn't there. And then you have the pandemic which strikes. So where is the data? Where are the policies shaping access to water? And I just mentioned blockchain, so SDG 9, technology innovation. We have seen lots of this being discussed, especially the issue of privacy. So is this going to be another post 9/11 where people had to give up so much of their own rights in order to ensure the common good, the security for all? Now, where are we in terms of the privacy, and how do we leverage the technology without impacting, of course, without influencing, and where is the preparedness of the law to address the issue of privacy, but at the same time ensure safety of one and all? Inequality, as I said, SDG 10 has become very cross-cutting. And we have seen it's not just a question of wealth. It's above all, complete and total access, equal access to food, water, energy, and all the basic necessities. And at the end, as I mentioned, it's the issue of partnership. How strong is the partnership? And I think here we have seen how critical it is, how we still need a multilateral world. Multilateralism is very much alive. We have seen it, and we have seen that making one region great is not going to happen. Is not going to hurt anyone. So we need to see again through the policy lens how these laws, whether it's regional or whether it's national or whether it's transnational, how these laws are seamlessly applying to the national laws and the national conventions in order to be able to leverage in this very important issue of how partnership can work for one and all. So I think these are some of the issues that I thought in terms of looking at the SDGs and how we can see it through an academic lens in terms of data generation and also revealing to the policymakers the state of preparedness of our institution so that we can roll out whatever we have to roll out in terms of policy, in terms of technology, in terms of food security, water, so that we take one step in the right direction in terms of addressing at least some of the building blocks that will eventually lead us to some success with the SDGs as we move along. So that's my take for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, President. That's very inclusive and comprehensive. Food, innovation and technology, health, gender inequality, water, equality in general, and partnerships have been identified as priority SDGs that can lead the way towards a sustainable future and a recovery from this COVID crisis. And I would like to turn now to Garry Jacobs as a representative for academia and ask, what is the driving force? What is the importance of having a scientifically driven implementation of the SDGs? Obviously, it's data, but it's not just data. It's the modeling, it's the understanding of the data, it's how you use the data in order to mobilize change, in order to structure change in a scientifically based way and mobilize all this scientific capacity to serve the implementation of the SDGs. What are the ways to actually be able to use the scientific capacity to mobilize the SDG? We've seen with the COVID, when we faced an imminent existential threat, we were all more careful in listening to the relevant scientists. We don't have this with the SDGs. We don't have this with the sustainability transition because the existential threat seems less immediate. How can we mobilize that?
Well, thank you for the question, Phoebe, and my greetings to all of you, a lot of old friends here. Rovshan, thank you for inviting the Academy to participate. NGIC is a close partner of ours. President Constantinescu, who's on our Board of Trustees and we work closely with. Nice to see you, Nikos, again. We partnered a year ago. And Winston, our former chairman of the board, and Rosalia, our distinguished fellow. So greetings to all of you. These are very important questions, and I'm really pleased that the NGIC has convened this meeting. Much more, of course, than we can deal with effectively in a few minutes. But I'd like to make a few basic comments about it. One is, you're absolutely right, Phoebe, that we have not gotten the same traction on existential threats like climate change or the devastating impact of the financialization of our economies as we are getting on this. I'm American, but I'm speaking from in India now, and I'm based here. We've just crossed the 200,000 cases mark for COVID-19, and it's growing at almost 10,000 a day. So we're just at the beginning of seeing what's going to happen here. But I think that it's very important that we look at this in a perspective. We missed great opportunities in the past, not just with the climate change, but with 2008 financial crisis. We did all the wrong things. And I'm mentioning that up front because I'm afraid we're going to do all the wrong things now also. In our urgency to repair the economic climate and uphold the financial system, we really have to we need to think about this at a deeper level than what's the quick fix. And we know there isn't any really quick fix. We have to deal with the emergency of food crisis, which was mentioned, and people going hungry. In India, hundreds of thousands of millions of labor, casual labor, migrant labor that have been displaced. They've come 500,000 miles from their homes to work and then sent back because everything is closed down. So they're very serious issues, but there's something more fundamental here. And that's what we're trying to focus on in the Academy. Fundamentally, our economic system and our financial system doesn't make sense. And we're not going to solve these problems by reinforcing what we've done before. almost $10 trillion was thrown at the financial markets and the financial institutions after 2008, while Americans were going homeless by the millions. And it was the banks that were bailed out for doing the wrong thing rather than the people who were really supported. And this is, we're talking about academia, and you've asked me about academia. And I think academia has a real responsibility to challenge the conventional wisdom about the economic orthodoxy and the financial orthodoxy, which is still governing us in spite of its failures, in spite of our reaching the unprecedented levels of inequality that we haven't had in the US since the 1920s. And other countries are now mimicking us, and it's becoming the model for the world. This is a greater disaster than COVID-19. And I think this is the time, I'm mentioning it for precisely the reason that you mentioned, that this is the time when we have people's attention. And it would be a shame if we use that attention just to address the small thing of do we have enough masks and vaccines and everything, when the real issues that are going to impact many more people than COVID will ever, are already there, and they're being neglected. And therefore, I think the voice has to be on the fundamentals. What is this? This has a lot to do with academia. And that is, it's not just a question of the information. It's a question of, in the social sciences, I am a social scientist, it's a question of challenging basic premises. Is our knowledge, which academia is putting forth, and we're training millions of young people in these orthodoxies, and they're coming out and taking positions in NGOs, in international organizations, in banks and business, we're still teaching we're still teaching in MBA shareholder value as the mantra, as if business was ever founded just to support shareholders. Business is a social institution meant here to support the welfare of the society, and if it's not doing that, there's something fundamentally wrong. There's something fundamentally wrong with our knowledge system and our academic system if we're still teaching that nonsense at a time when the whole society is under threat because of it. I worked in India for decades, and I know during the Green Revolution, which, India took 10,000 years to reach 50 million tons of food grain production, 10,000 years. And in 10 years, it doubled it. What it had done in 10,000 years, it doubled in 10,000. And one of the things, they did many things. One of the things they did is they asked all of the scientific research institutes in the country, focus on what the country really needs, which is food production. Now, you would have assumed in a country like India that that's what already was happening, but it wasn't. Every researcher in every institution was focusing on the things they were interested in or something that had local value. We've got global social challenges now, and we are not fully mobilizing our scientific research capabilities effectively to meet those challenges. Last year, we collaborated with Nikolaos and the Black Sea universities working on the SDGs. I was delighted to see that universities coming together and networking with each other to try to solve practical problems of tremendous social impact in their society. We're a member of the IAP, the Inter-Academy Partnership of academies, more than 100 academies around the world. And they are pioneering now in getting the academies of the world to come together instead of just working on national issues or what the national governments are saying we will fund, looking at the global issue, sharing information, and really trying to address issues at the global level. Who's doing that today? Who's really responsible for that today? And IPCC is a good example of what we can do with knowledge when we are able to do it at that level. Just a couple of things I'd like to focus on. One specific reference to the COVID-19 is employment. In the US, we're seeing unemployment levels we haven't seen since the Great Depression. And they're getting worse now rather than better. And this is a worldwide phenomenon. if you look at the theory on which our employment strategies are based now, it's fundamentally inadequate to meet the needs in a situation like this. We know there are alternative tested means for doing that. Today, more than 80% of the global financial resources are being used for financial speculation, not for funding in the real economy. We don't have a shortage of resources in the world. We don't have a shortage of resources in the world. There's plenty of money, there's plenty of knowledge, but we've got a system that actually takes the money out of the local communities, puts it into the national banks, which channel it into the international financial markets to get their highest return. It never goes back to the communities, rarely goes back to the communities from which it's going. So I think, apart from the quick fix of what we need to do for people who need the food today and the welfare today, we've got to use the pressure of this situation to go much deeper and challenge outmoded ideas, outmoded theories that are being driven still because there are a lot of power in global society and national society that still thrive on them. And I just like to, these are big topics and you've opened up something wonderful, but I want to hear my colleagues, but I would just like to mention, as Rovshan knows, we're partnering with NGIC. Last year, about 15 months ago, we launched a project with the United Nations in Geneva at Baku, at the Global Baku Forum, with NGIC as a partner, looking at the future of global leadership. Who's in charge today? Who's leading today? And what do we need for that? And it's not a question of looking at the individuals. How do we, 193 nations of the UN, lead ourselves collectively to address the collective problems we have? And unfortunately, my own country is being a very bad example right now of what global leadership is all about, no matter how much we all wanted to rely on that. So we have a conference coming up, if I would just like to mention, from June 15th to 19th, on the issues that NGIC is raising today, looking at all of the dimensions of it as part of a project with the UN for a major conference in October on how do we lead the world instead of taking 10,000 years or 500 years or even 20 years, we don't have that, to move forward. How do we accelerate the process of our global evolution and transform issues now? And I would like to invite all of you to participate in the conference and to join with us in a wider effort as NGIC has, so that we can come together with the solutions needed for rapid change, but that goes deep and has impact and doesn't just skim the surface. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a very inspiring intervention. I'm going to quote you in what you said: the voice has to be on the fundamentals, and that science can help with respect to that. And in your efforts, definitely United Nations Sustainable Development Network, which is a global network of research and university institutions, we can certainly join you in your initiatives, and we have a lot of capacity to help on in mobilizing each and every SDG implementation. And I would also like to point to a very insightful point that we need to learn from the history of the 2008 financial crisis. And we need to keep away from making the same mistakes. Actually, a recent study that I've done with colleagues from LSE and Oxford University shows that the experience of the great financial crisis shows that green stimulus and inclusive stimulus policies have advantages over traditional fiscal stimulus. They deliver higher higher multiples, and because they reduce long-term energy cost and they have significant flow-on effects on the wider economy. So not only we've experienced a wrong recovery a decade ago, but we now have evidence that the fiscal stimulus should be directed to sectors that really deliver higher multiples. And I also agree with what you said with regards to the financial system is definitely unsustainable and does not respect social or welfare, equity, or sustainability. And on this note, I would like to call in the discussion President Constantinescu, Emil Constantinescu, to give us his view of the current crisis and the way Romania is dealing with it, and his thoughts on how the SDGs, science-driven SDGs, can help us avoid making this economic crisis, this health crisis, into a long-lasting economic crisis. What can we do, President?
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here in the presence of such a distinguished company. In fact, when our partners, the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, relayed the theme of the conference, the role of the academic environment in managing the sustainable development goals during the pandemic, my first instinct was to doubt that the academic environment can become involved at all during the pandemic, given that its primary responsibility is to formulate solutions for the medium and long term in order to prevent similar crises from manifesting in the future, rather than coming up with short-term answers. However, when I saw the list of participants, I realized that this online reunion served an important purpose, given that the invitees to this prestigious event are notable figures which share an academic background, who later went on to become heads of state, and were therefore forced to make use of their experience as professors and scientific researchers to resolve some of the most stringent issues of the day, at the time when society itself was undergoing radical changes which brought about major economic and social crisis for many. To begin with the end, our experiences during our mandates as heads of state were a success primarily because we did not limit ourselves to immediate solutions, but proved capable of conveying to the masses the essential idea that the social price that needed to be paid at the time was essential for accomplishing a higher purpose, which for those of us who served their country in Southeastern Europe after the fall of communist regime was the replacement of dictatorship and planned economies with budding democracies and a functional market economy. In our post-totalitarian transition, our peoples accepted this sacrifice due to this very message of hope, eventually fulfilled, as today the countries of Eastern Europe are consolidated democracies with major market economies, just as Mauritius has proven a model of democracy and economic efficiency for Africa, and Ecuador has for Latin America. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the exemplary civic responsibility shown by billions of people worldwide who followed the advice of medical professionals, even while governmental messages were limited to stay indoors, wash your hands, wear a face mask, keep your distance, or in the most fortunate of cases, only barely managing to address critical health care of economic issues. Now, 3 months on, we can see that it was a very lack of the consistent message to take the problem of sustainable development, which generated social tensions, can easily evolve into more or less controllable revolts, such as the ones buffeting the United States and several Western European countries over the past week. Coincidentally or not, 2020 should have been the debut of the decade for action of the Sustainable Development Goals, set in the broader framework of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, aiming to improve upon essential yet diverse problems such as poverty, literacy, access to water and hygiene, social inequality or climate change, have not diminished in importance throughout the pandemic. Also, newsreels focus primarily on broadcasting information on symptoms, infection rate, and deaths to count above mentioned critical issues to aggravate, left untended. Perhaps surprisingly, the pandemic has highlighted grave shortcomings in the field of healthcare, economics, education, social protection, and human rights across the majority of developed countries, which only goes to show that existing institutions lack advanced warning system that allow for fail-safe solution in times of crisis. Developing countries for whom the developed world serve as role models to aspire to can now legitimately question their chosen future path. And just as legitimately, then they ask the member of the academic environment why they chose to keep their long silence instead of publicly tackling and exposing these deficiencies, which in the only 3 months were painfully highlighted by the virus itself. Our answer to the pandemic must not be separated from our endeavors to implement the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We must merely re-evaluate and prioritize those aspects we expect to worsen after the state of pandemic is lifted by the WHO CDGs, 1, poverty, 4, education, 6, access to water and hygiene, 10, combating inequality, 12, responsible consumption and production practices. And lastly, SDG 16, securing peace, justice, while adequately managing the security institution. Revitalizing these critical goals can only be accomplished through solidarity and international cooperation. The very things that have been made much more difficult after states faced with tragic events during the pandemic began to self-isolate and to only seek solutions for their individual salvation. The immediate solution for the smoothest possible recovery have to include a better planning of public and private investment in sustainable development in order to create a resilient infrastructure, the strengthening of our social protection system, and an increased investment in uncovering underlying causes and minimizing existing risks. What can the academic environment offer to better manage these goals? Vision, strategy, and specialized instruments. Ongoing qualitative and quantitative research has helped identify the extent issues and the number of people affected. We now know that the coronavirus pandemic has had a major impact on the broad swathes of the global population, not only from a medical perspective, but also economically, socially, culturally, educationally, psychologically, emotionally, affecting the future of democracy and of human rights. In order to provide solutions that facilitate sustainable development, the academic environment must create its own agenda and refuse to acquiesce to the pressures of the financial or political milieu, which so often has been proven in the past to seek to only further their own interest. In order to forestall a return to prior situation or a worsening of existing ones, as happened after the financial and security crisis of the early 21st century. In accepting its given mission as a glue holding social solidarity together, the highest consideration of the academic milieu must be the interest of citizens. Before presenting their own plan to rebuild contemporary society found adrift, academics and researchers must first set their own affairs in order. Ethical and moral issues must become paramount to the academic milieu. The scientific research must persevere in its search for truth instead of profit in any of later's many guises, financial, political, or of public perception. Scientists must refrain from using sound bites crafted by communication specialists such as the new normal, a vague phrase signifying nothing and everything at once. And they must reject the cliché of political correctness, which only rebranded societal evils as slightly more attractive without tackling their underlying causes. Balanced SWOT analysis of the globalization project is long overdue. One that distances itself from equally damaging utopian or dystopian approaches. An impact study that highlights the correct proportion between social costs and benefits, as well as the preferred distribution thereof, given that all the crises of the late 20s, early 21st century have only served to exacerbate the divide between wealth and poverty, hollowing out the middle class, the pillar of representative democracy. So badly it is now becoming apparent in even developed nations. Sustainable development can only be achieved in a society founded on moral values instead of profit. One capable of minimizing greed, wastefulness, and arrogance, while promoting faith, mindfulness, and decent living standard. In this society, the academic milieu must act as a guarantor which safeguards that technology does not affect our natural right to privacy, that artificial intelligence or automatization do not dehumanize the social fabric, that the medical progress is strictly controlled along ethical lines, that education is again predicated on imparting knowledge rather than skills and abilities, and that culture is not replaced by entertainment. The alternative is what we have been witness to over the last few days on our television screens and across social media platforms. Peaceful manifestation condemning a revolt abuse of authority by police, hijacked by violent groups aiming to provoke a general chaos. For Europeans, this seems like a déjà vu on the image of the street clashes between far left and far right anarchists in 1930s Germany, which ultimately led to fascist and communist dictatorship across the old continent. We in Western Europe are thankfully inoculated against the flagellum of this type of dictatorship. And we are aware that this kind of societal devolution cannot occur again today. This does not mean that we must not be mindful of the danger of that threatened representative democracy coming either from the ranks of the protestocracy, a violent movement bereft of ideology, leadership, or an avowed membership which aims to institute a generalized anarchy, or from unchecked authoritarianism which threatens with armed intervention of military forces. President,
thank you very much, President. We are trying to create a dialogue as well. So if you don't mind my interruption, we are going to come back to you. These are very important and significant issues. Obviously, the need for SDGs to have a well-being, social well-being basis and a moral basis is crucial. And the issues that you're raising are proving to be instrumental for the geopolitical security all over the world. Can I move forward after this truly inspirational speech by a great man who reformed Romania into a contemporary market economy? Can I ask another representative from academia, Winston Nagan, chairman of the Board of Trustees of World Academy of Art and Science? Can I address you with the question that was put forward by the president of Romania? Why academia did not manage to communicate the efficiencies in all these sectors of the economy and aspects of social well-being that have been explicitly and aggressively revealed during the pandemic?
Oh, sorry. Winston was like, unlocked, and he's now trying to join it. That's why,
Okay. So maybe I move. Should I move to another speaker?
Because he's still joining.
He's joining. Okay.
It will take a couple more minutes maybe. That's why you can maybe move to another speaker.
Okay. So I would like to go to Professor Nikolaos Theodossiou. SDGs are crucial. They should be implemented, but with a moral basis. And Nico, you know that we are working with Jeff Sachs on a big project trying to center well-being and people's happiness, having them as the access for the implementation of sustainable goals and morality behind these goals. So I would like your view on how SDGs can become our moral basis, but they can also become our growth strategy.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you very much for the Nizami Ganjavi International Center for this very interesting discussion with such distinguished panelists. This is a very crucial issue that you raise, Phoebe. The SDGs are in the center of our future. They are the path line for our future. This is something we need to realize, and we need to disseminate and to make people understand that this is the pathway for our future. This is another opportunity, a very good opportunity actually, to repeat one more time that the Sustainable Development Goals are not 17 independent goals. They are one goal in 17 parts with 17 directions. Again, President Fakim described very well in a very good way the SDGs that are in the center of attention during this pandemic. We find various combinations of SDGs in various situations, and we need to realize that this is there's a very close connection between the SDGs, and we need to pursue them in a global way and not independently. If we want to achieve something and to make this process valuable for everyone. Actually, we started this conversation last year at the Global Baku Forum with the World Academy of Arts and Sciences and Garry Jacobs and a lot of distinguished members of the Academy and of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, our network for the Black Sea. It was a very interesting discussion, and we find ourselves now, more than a year later, discussing about the same, more or less the same issues. I think that a key issue in this pandemic is to realize that this is, of course, a disaster, a global disaster. There's no question about that. But if we want to put a half full glass on the table of discussion, we need to see that there's also an opportunity. There's a challenge and an opportunity here. We are rushing to a new normal situation. This new normal situation does not have to be and mustn't be the situation we had before the pandemic. We have a huge opportunity here that everything is, we made a big restart, a global restart. And we as academics and as scientists, we have an obligation and we have the duty to put things in the right way and to pursue a new normal that it will be more sustainable and will be more effective for everyone, and it will lead to the implementation of the SDGs in the coming years. It doesn't need to be a continuation of the disaster. The COVID-19 is a disaster. The new normal, the new situation that we are going to does not have to be again a disaster. We have the opportunity and we have to face this challenge to make things better. And we can do that if we focus on what we know and how we can work together. We can do much better things. I mean, even this experience with how we face the COVID-19 crisis, the cooperation, the global cooperation, all scientists were working all over the world for the same goal, they were exchanging experiences, they were exchanging data. This was a huge effort, and we managed to prove that if we work together, we can do a lot of things and we can achieve a lot of things. So I think we need to keep this in mind and look at the focus on the half full glass, and take on to this challenge and collaborate to find better ways to achieve the SDGs.
Thank you, Nikos. Thank you very much. I keep from your intervention the message that this is a challenge and an opportunity, and we should be very careful not to waste it and use it to build a sustainable future, an inclusive future, and a collaborative future. Further to your beautiful academic intervention, I would like to now call in the discussion the President of Albania, President Bujar, Nishani, a man who is known to focus his term in presidency on European integration, and also explicitly committed to ratifying the Paris Agreement on climate change. I would like to ask you, President Nishani, how do you see the Balkan region? How do you see our region of the world being able to respond to the current crisis without abandoning the SDG agenda? Can we have a long-term view, a long-term approach towards our reconstruction of our economies and societies? Or are we going to be trapped again to the need for quick fixes?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and I would like to use this chance to extend my grateful to Nizami Ganjavi International Center for being so active even in this pandemic situation. And thank you, Rovjan, for offering me to be part of this very honorable panel and such interesting discussions about academics. In fact, I do not belong to academics, even because my career I started as a university lecturer, but I belong to the politics, which now is more and more demonstrated a kind of lack of trust by the people, and the academics demonstrate more trust by the society, by the people, and the pandemic shows evidently this situation. So I'm so honored to be part of this panel, and to extend my grateful for everything that I had the chance to hear and to profit by these discussions. When we talk about SDGs, we have in mind lots of things, and let me to emphasize, for example, the need for a strong health system, fewer people living in extreme poverty, less gender inequality, or a health natural environment, more resilient societies, and so on. When we have in mind these standards, we understand and we saw that COVID-19 has put all these issues at risk and danger. So we have to reflect in front of these challenges that the case of the pandemic brought to SDGs. When we talk about SDGs, we have in mind a security of our societies, peace of our societies, economical developments of our societies. But all of those have to be built based on trust and confidence. As I see the COVID-19 pandemic, I see it more as a crisis of the trust, as a crisis of the confidence to all the tools and mechanisms of the political systems, of our societies, institutions, different actors of our societies. So that brought us in our reflections that we are at risk, above all, when something can destroy our trust and confidence. So to rebuild and to restore the trust and confidence, we have to start building reliable global research base and evidences, which might be brought firstly by the academic environment, by the academic people. If we see now, nowadays, that the politics demonstrated a kind of lack of trust, media as an extreme important power is challenged. In one side, we have the traditional media. In the other side, we have the social media, which challenge each other and are challenged also by the kind of information which circulate so fast among us, but with lots of problems also. And in this situation, if I can talk a little bit about our region that you mentioned rightly, in the Balkans or in southeast of Europe, the pandemic came a kind of easier way comparing with the western side of Europe. But our people were more terrified by the situation which we saw in Italy and Spain than in situation in our countries. So when we have missing the voice of academics, the data offered and analysis offered by the academics, we can be in a kind of trick among ourselves, among our societies. Because if we have now the situation when the economy is so weak and threatened, but after the weak economy, we have a stability threatened, we have a cooperation threatened, we have a partnership threatened, and it means that the peace itself and understanding itself is threatened. It is true that the pandemic was easier way in the Balkans, but the Balkans, our countries, are so much affected by the economy of the European countries. Not only because our approach to European integration as a process itself, but the communication, by the culture, by the economy, by the exchanging of the people. So it might be a kind of challenge in one side as a pandemic itself, but when we are involved in a threatened economy, in a threatened sustainability, as entire society, as a perception, as a psychology, we all are threatened in the same way, in the same level. So what I see, how I see now the involvement of the academy is that focused on some pillars like the education, for example, in communication, in transparency, and scientific studies. In education, it's extremely important that the new generation to be resilient with the situation that we are passing now, and exchanging of students' experiences of the countries will help very much to understand and to react rapidly in terms of psychology behavior, and focusing in what? Focusing on the political will or political behavior, focusing on the media exchange information, or focusing on the analysis and data of the academics. The pandemic show itself beyond the threat, beyond the difficulties, that how much important are for us every day the thoughts, the knowledges, the outcomes of the academic staff, academic people, and academic institutions. Communication is extremely important. This communication that we are building today, helping by the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, is a symbol, is a model in which we have to be circulated, not just information, not just the views, but even the possibility to profit by each other and to deliver after that the knowledge that the academic possess by themselves. And the transparency is extremely important, because in the battle of the media, especially in the social media, we have the more responsibility for this transparency. Let me to emphasize one thing. All of us are focused very much on climate change, especially on the threat and the danger that plastic might create in our planet. But during the pandemic, the plastic waste raised very much. For example, we have to hear some discussions, or a lot of discussions about the importance of using the face mask every day, or we have to focus what the academic is delivering us, dealing with importance for how we have to defend and protect ourselves. So that's the transparency is extremely important in the world of exchanging communication that we are facing nowadays. And by end, the scientific studies. Scientific studies belong to the academic, and the academic has responsibility, but they have to be supported. And it's the time that the government, the philanthropy, big national, international organization has or have to understand how much important it is to support and to finance the scientific studies by the academic, in terms that to bring people to the real understanding, to real knowledges, and to have after that a real behavior for challenging the risks and threats that might appear to us anytime, like the COVID-19. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you very much for creating such possibility.
President Nishani, for us that we are academics and we've devoted our lives to research, I think all of us want to applaud by your closing statement and by the general focus of your statement. Indeed, the pandemic showed that we need science, and those governments that followed science closely managed to face the pandemic in a much smoother way than others. Indeed, we need trust, we need confidence, we need to be scientifically driven, and education and communication and transparency are important. I'm just quoting you because what you said is what the governments, but also the civil society and also the business sector has to endorse in order to allow for scientific results to form a basis for a sustainable pathway of this world, not just with regards to the environment, but with regards to how we deal with our economics, how we deal with our finances, and how we deal with our social issues, as well as environmental issues. Thank you so much. I would like now go back to, is he with us now?
Winston?
Or,
okay, he is coming and he is leaving all the time.
Winston is coming and leaving all the time. Okay, I will move
He
to.
just left again.
Okay, Winston, can you hear me?
No, he's not with us.
Okay.
And I think that he's trying to join us back.
Okay, so I'm going to Laszlo Borberli. I'm sorry about the pronunciation of names. I was never good at that. Who is the State Councillor for the Department for Sustainable Development of Romania, a country who has done a lot with regards to the green transition, who has entered the emissions trading system of the EU, who is actively involved in sustainability transition, and ask here exactly what President Constantinescu asked, why academia was unable to communicate the quite obvious deficiencies in the different sectors of the economy. We that we are in academia know that we've been talking about dangers and deficiencies and uncertainties and risk for years and years, but all these worries and studies and scientific results did not translate into a precautionary policy at the government level. Why do we fail? Why do we fail to have our voices heard?
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with these distinguished panelists. And I suppose that I am the only person who belongs to the governmental side, so the state. And what we are doing to implement this Agenda 2030, which is, in my opinion, one of the basic documents of humanity in this period. And 2015 was a crucial year, a milestone regarding two very important documents, Agenda 2030 and Paris climate change document. What we have to do, because it takes 5 years to realize that we need political leadership, commitment, political willingness. Without political willingness, it's unbelievable how weak we are. Because because I am also teaching to the Babes-Bolyai University, sustainable development. But without leadership, without political decisions, it's we fail. And I tell you just one example. For 1 year, I was chairing the CSD 19, the last CSD on the level of United Nations. And on that time, we negotiate for 2 years 5 very important technical documents. It was not about politics, yes? Chemicals, mining, 10 IFP, waste management, and sustainable transport. And in one day, because of the political pressure, Osama bin Laden was killed on that time in May 2011, and it was a very big pressure between United States and Arab countries and G77. They reject all 5 technical declarations on the level of United Nations. So we need partnerships. And based on my experience, we need a movement on the level of society. Why I'm telling you? Because from 3 years ago, we established a department near the Prime Minister's office. We have this political commitment in Romania still now, but will be more difficult because now we are in stage that we have an institutional framework, a ministerial committee led by the Prime Minister, but now we are preparing an action plan for the next coming years until 2030. Regarding academia, is here Nikos and President Constantinescu. We organized 3 different meetings with the Black Sea SDSN, with President Constantinescu, the 11th Institute. We have a partnership. We have a partnership with about 10 or 15 different NGOs and others who are preparing very important events. And the COVID, what proves in this couple of months? How weak we are. The most developed countries, yes, in couple of weeks, entering collapse. It's incredible for us. So we have to prepare ourselves, institutionally speaking, about our vision and our tools in our hand to prepare ourselves for these 10 years. Regarding Romania, we have a very interesting mixture about how we can have a lack of real leadership in this moment, in my opinion, and how, regarding myself, when I talk about Agenda 2030, it's a positive approach from all the political parties. Why? Because in this moment, it's just, you know, for them, something which is interesting. They don't really understand how it's functioning. But if we have in our hand institutional frameworks, databases, academic area, the Babeș-Bolyai University 2 weeks ago finalized a very important dashboard of all the Romanian municipalities, all the Romanian local authorities, how, in which stage we are. We need an analysis, we need background documents, impact studies, we have to put together different strategies, and we need a vision, of course, but we need to have the society with us. And that's why I am very confident that this year will be a crucial year for Agenda 2030, in my opinion. We need to have decisions for the policymakers, and that's why it's important. We will establish in 2 weeks a consultative council. President Constantinescu and other very important personalities for Romania, I hope, will enjoy us 34 people from Romania, from academic area, from NGOs, to work together in a European Union project for 3 years to prepare the decisions for the policymakers. And on the level of European Union, the last statement of mine, during our presidency, we succeed to have very important council conclusions. And based on this, last year, Ursula von Leyen, Madame Ursula von Leyen, put in place the European semester, which is based on 17, in this moment, on the 17 SDGs from next year. All the reports of the states of European Union have and will be obliged to analyze their economy, their social and environmental issues based on 17 SDGs. And secondly, we have this Green Deal. And in spite of the coronavirus, we have a very tough schedule for Green Deal. It's on us to realize that the climate change and all these issues, circular economy, and how taxonomy, how we support with more money in this moment, because realize everybody in European Union, we have to give more money for investments, for sustainable investments, for healthcare, and we have to use this opportunity of COVID, of this pandemic, of this disaster, to change our mentalities. That's why I hope that we will meet each other in other occasions, and you have, and myself, I hope, and my colleagues from Romania, all the society has to have a critical mass of those who have visions, who have dreams, and of course, every time I have more dreams than achievements. That's why it's important to have more dreams than achievements, but it's okay if you have also achievements, not just dreams. So we are dreamers, but I hope that we will put in place our dreams. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it is important to have a vision. It is important to have a vision and and then devise your pathways to achieving this vision. And this is what we call a systemic innovation approach. Work with the stakeholders, with the government, with the civil society, the policymakers, the business, the academia, co-design your vision and then work backwards in order to identify pathways that allow you to implement these visions. And I agree with you that we have our blueprints for devising, for designing our pathways to a vision of a sustainable and inclusive and prosperous society. It is UN Agenda 2030 and of course the European Commission's Green Deal. And I really want to compliment you for identifying the need for a pact, for an agreement and a commitment of all the stakeholders. We need strong institutions, we need academic analysis, we need databases, but most of all, we need the vision and the engagement of all the stakeholders for co-designing the vision and then constructing pathways to achieving these visions. And on that note, I would like to ask former President of Ecuador, President Rosalia Serrano, to give us her view from her part of the world on how SDGs can create this pact, this commitment for all of the society. I'm currently drafting the opinion for the Climate Pact for the European Commission, and I'm also leading the UN SDSN senior working group for the implementation of the European Green Deal. And for both, I realize that the important thing is the engagement and the commitment of all the stakeholders. How can we engage everybody in our SDGs in order to allow these SDGs to lead the recovery from this COVID crisis? President?
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here sharing with such an important panel. I'm happy to see President Constantinescu, President Ameenah, President Nishani, and also my good friend Garry from the World Academy and the distinguished guests from the Academy that are here sharing this panel. I also want to say thank you to Nisani Ganjavi Center, not only for organizing this kind of panels, but also because I had a lot of talks with Rob Chan in the past weeks, and the help that he and Nisani Ganjavi and the chairs are providing in food, for example, or in masks for people of my country. And thank you for that. And I want to say some things coming from a region that now is suffering probably the worst of this pandemic in Latin America. We have the situation in Brazil. I had opportunity to work in Brazil for some years, being the General Secretary of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, and having the possibility to work with all the basin in issues that has to deal a lot with the SDG, the goals that the United Nations put in terms, for example, in how to fight with climate change and how to deal with the preservation of the groups, of the vulnerable groups that are there in this very big region that is like 40% of South America. It's such a big region. And Also with the situation that now is happening in countries like Mexico or Chile or my own countries. That's a big pandemic in terms of health issues, but also we are facing another big pandemic that has to be with starving, with people not having food, an economic pandemic that probably is going to be worse than the virus, the COVID. It is such a big issue that governments are not knowing how to deal with these situations. And unfortunately, there is another big pandemic, and I want to remark what President Constantinescu and others talk about values and about ethics, because without ethics, we cannot face all these big challenges. But it's another big pandemic about corruption in our countries. Just today, a former president of Ecuador and also some local authorities are put in jail this morning because of corruption, about what's happening with supplies for hospitals. And it is terrible that we are facing this kind of situations, not only in my country, but in other countries in Latin America and probably around the globe. Then I feel that this pandemic is showing us the worst and the best. The best in terms of solidarity, in terms of what the academia and the science can do to provide vaccines or to provide medicines, but also the worst in terms of corruption, especially, and non-solidarity in certain situations. That's the reason that I am really, really scary about what's the future of our part of the world. Some international organizations are talking a lot about wave of hunger that is coming through South America, the wave of hunger. Not only the possibility that the middle class is going to be with less resources, or that the poor are going to get poorest, but the wave of hunger, and it's scary. And I am only looking at what's happening in countries, very powerful countries like North America, what's going on with the pandemic, and what's going on in such a big country with the pandemic, with the governments that are not, they cannot face, or they cannot realize how to fight the pandemic, and also not leaving behind the bad situations in other fields. For example, in the same field of health, the issue of vaccines. What's happening with vaccines all over the world? In our continent, we had a lot of dengue and malaria, and also some situations with kind of illness that can be fighted by vaccines. But now people is letting vaccines away and thinking about what's going to be with coronavirus and not with the other pandemics also. And we are also concerned about what's happening with environmental issues. At the beginning, we think, and probably I was one of the person that were thinking that, okay, at last we have better air, clean air. We can have animals going to the cities, recovering spaces and things like that, because now the people are isolated in their own houses. But what's happening with the gloves and the masks and the plastic bags that people is using to fight the pandemic, and what's happening with all these substances that are being used probably in not a proper way, then I feel that the SDG are going or are getting back in the what's happening with the policies of the governments. There are other issues that I want to at least to mention, like, for example, what's happening with domestic violence. In most of the countries, the isolations provide bad situations for women, for kids, because they have to share sometimes very small spaces, and also the continuously be in touch with the people that can make bad things for women and for kids. In other hand, we had the situation that the most successful countries to fight the pandemic are the countries that had leaders that are women. And we can mention some examples, not only Germany, but Iceland or New Zealand, where women had better ways to face the pandemic in the different parts of the world. Then it is a good point for the analysis. What are the women making different when they are heads of states? What are women making in a better way than in other parts of the world? And we are not talking only about small countries, but even big countries like Germany. And that's an issue that we have probably to analyze maybe in this kind of forums or in other forums. Another issue that I share with most of you when you talk about what tools we can use to go through this situation, one of the big tools is education. Personally, I'm a lot involved in educational issues, working, trying to prepare or train teachers for STEAM projects, working to make it available, some technological tools for the people. Then it is such an important tool, but you cannot get
just click on that.
Immediately. You cannot have the results immediately in educational issues. You have to wait a little bit. Then you have to go not only through education, but also with the media, how we can work with media, with communication, with approach that are different, not only in formal education, but also non-formal education, using this kind of tool nowadays we have. Then I want to call the attention of the world through this forum about what's happening in Latin America and how this situation, this pandemic, but the hunger and the poverty can be fight in different ways. We signed a document with Mr. Gordon through NINSAMI International Center, asking United Nations and asking the most powerful countries in the world to pay attention of what's happening in poorest countries, because it's not possible to be wealthy in a world if other countries are in such a bad situation. Then the call has to be done in many fields, in many forums, in all the forums that we can achieve. And also, I feel that when we are talking about values, we have to talk about the value of the solidarity. The solidarity that can make like not only donations in some moments that we need that kind of donations, but also how the policies had to be done, how not only the profit has to be in the mind of the big companies, how the solidarity has to be in terms of working with the different poor countries and also poor sectors, even in wealthy countries. Then it's a lot to do. It's a big challenge for whole humanity, probably the biggest challenge that we had in the world in terms of the centuries that passed, because now with the globalization, we feel it more than in the past. When the other pandemics arrived to the humanity, we were not so interconnected, not so linked. The findings in terms of science had to be done with multidisciplinary equipments. I had been participating in a chat with some scientists from different parts of the world, and most of them don't know what to do in terms of what's happening with the virus, how the mutation is acting in different fields, how is the situation going on. Then it has to be a multitasking and a multidisciplinary approach to this kind of situation that we are. But I make a call for the solidarity of the world to the poorest countries on the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President. 3 main points from what it's all of them, but also their vulnerability.
Sorry.
Vulnerability.
I think there was like some problem with your internet connection. If you can.
You cannot hear me?
Now perfectly.
Maybe I close my camera.
No, and now we can hear you very well. Ameenah, with the camera as well.
Okay, thank you. So I'm keeping 3 points that I loved from the intervention of the President of Ecuador. First, the role of women when they are in power and what change they can bring to their society, but also their vulnerability when in marginalized situations. Second, the need to have underpinning morality and values, and the importance of the value of solidarity, which has been proven throughout this pandemic. And finally, that nobody can be strong, even if affluent, in a world that is collapsing. Not only because of the geopolitical instability, but because we are in such a globalized setting that it is not sustainable to be strong alone. On this note, I would like to finally give the floor to Winston and ask him to give us his perspective on the role of SDGs in mobilizing this recovery so that it is a recovery that we will all refer to as the structural break from an unsustainable to a sustainable pathway. The floor is yours. Can you hear us? Please unmute your microphone. We cannot hear you very well.
Let me say that, and I do think, let me see what I can do.
Now it's good. Now it's good. Now
okay,
it's good.
Okay. All right.
Yes,
okay.
please proceed.
All right.
Thank you.
I think that it's a demonstration in the US. Results of that. Winston, maybe you can just close your camera, and in order, like, just to slow the speed of the internet.
Yes, because we cannot hear you well.
Yeah, but maybe.
All right.
Wait, like, just to
is that better now?
Yes.
All right.
No way.
I first wanted to just say that the emphasis on 17 SDGs
Yeah, it's like, you know, not working with.
Not working. Maybe Winston, if you can get out of.
Let me try to send a message.
How's that now?
Turn off the video, Winston. Try that.
What? I beg your pardon?
Turn off the camera.
Oh. Is that better?
Yes.
No,
okay.
No, I think you just covered it.
No. I took this camera, but I wasn't sure whatever else I should be doing here. Arthur, come over here.
Stop the video. It should work better.
Arthur, come in a minute. Can you just give me a hand? Okay. Can you get me one? I've got my assistant here.
What's wrong?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, but it's better if you stop the video. It's on the left down side corner of your screen.
Let me try it just if you can do
that one? Okay, all right.
Literally wouldn't make any difference, but okay.
Did you do it? Okay. How's that?
Okay, please continue.
All right. Okay, I'll start again.
No way.
No, it's not working. So I think Ronshan, Winston, we cannot hear you. The line is being interrupted. It is not possible for us to understand what you're saying.
I'm trying to him, but he keeps insisting on. Yeah. Sorry.
Is that better?
Winston?
Yes.
Yes, is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Winston?
Very brief.
No.
The emphasis is extremely more in the terms of solidarity.
I think can. Yeah, but it's like it didn't work out. I think that there is a problem with the internet in the US. Yep, Phoebe?
Yes, so unfortunately we didn't manage to have Winston's intervention, which would have been really interesting. But I want to thank you all for this amazing panel. Your contributions have been to the point and really inspire. It is really inspiring to see how people who served academia, but also the policy world, have a passion and see the necessity for change. I will give the floor to Roshan to summarize relevant activities of the Nijami Foundation and also this Nijami Center and also this panel discussion. So Roshan, thank you for bringing us all together. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for your time, like, you know, everyone for sharing your time and being with us. It's really valuable because everyone needs to hear the voices of the leaders like you, because the current situation is so we are losing the value of solidarity. And the COVID-19 pandemic showed us that there is no, like, you know, during all these video conferences that we've hosted, it showed us that every country looks like they're at small islands. They are, like, you know, in a different ocean, and they are like, no one is contacting with each other, and which is not possible. Even when it comes to with solidarity of the academicians and or the pandemic, antivirus. America is not collaborating with China. China is not collaborating with the European Union. European Union is not collaborating with US. And then it comes out like, you know, small countries like we are all. We are looking to the big countries like President Rosalia was mentioned. You know, we are looking for how it's going to be handled out. And it's a good point which Madam President mentioned, and I really truly admire that point that during all this pandemic period, if we look up to the politics, the women leaders took a leadership role. Like small countries or bigger country, a former president or a current president, doesn't matter. The former women leaders are like, you know, from Helen Clark, Miss Alieva, President Vaidevika Freberga, President Rosalia, Kerry Kennedy, and so on, everyone like, you know, being too much involved. But the biggest problem which everyone is like discussing is what's the role of United States of America? Because we don't like, it's the biggest superpower. And where there is no role for academicians, and the president doesn't accept the role of academicians, and he doesn't like to wear masks, and how it's going to be faced up. And if we are going to face a second wave of this pandemic, with a lack of like leadership of the first one, how we're going to do the second one. There's lack of masks, there's lack of like medical equipment, there's lack of respirators, there's lack of everything. And the European Union is blocking, for example, from China to bring up everything like, you know, day by day. And it's going to be too difficult. And also the last thing, I liked very much a comment from Yves Leterme, former Prime Minister of Belgium, when he said that IT sector, the massive involvement of IT sector is going to change the life of institutions. Now, how we are going to get ready for that? Because now IT, like, you know, with a Zoom, with a webinar, or with like, you know, different connections, we can host like different conferences. And it's more cheaper. It is like, you know, better for the climate. You don't need to buy tickets and to pollute the air with air trafficking. And that's all like, you know, coming up. It's going to change our life. But how we are going to face that? And that's important, that the role of academicians and the role of the former politicians, and if we can combine them and we can make them to be like, you know, closely to each other, that will be perfectly. President Rosalia mentioned a letter with Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Yesterday it was issued the second letter, and it was published in Washington Post, Financial Times, in all the international media, Independence, and but how it's going to affect. More than 220 dignitaries signed these papers. Kailash had 45 Nobel laureates with President Nishani and President Rosalia and President Fakim. We joined a message with Nobel laureates to save the children who are going to be most suffered. But what's the role we are going to play? What's the role of academicians and what's the role of international institutions? Are we going to gather and to talk and have no results, or we are going to try to do some actions? Also, we are going to host the 23rd of June a conference. I think we are starting sending invitations. 23rd, 24th, and 25th conference dedicated to the 75th anniversary of United Nations. We are going to host it according to the time zone differences in order everyone to be involved. The speakers are from His Royal Highness Prince Turki Faisal, Helen Clark, Jeffrey Sachs, and so we'll be happy to have your involvement and any impact or any input, any advice you may have, we will be happy to have, and we remain at your disposal, like, you know, to follow up on this with World Academy of Arts and Sciences, also with Phoebe and Nikos on Sustainable Development Solutions Network.
Thank you so much. Thanks for everything. Thanks for putting together such a panel. We should write a press release on this. I mean, so many presidents, so much experience and power and inspiration here. We should write a short press release, Roshan. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good time.
Bye. An honor
Thank you, all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's an honor being able to moderate this discussion. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank
Thank you, Phoebe.
Thank you.